Now, I don't want you to confuse this concept right here. We are not hunting people. Let me repeat, we're hunting deer. But how many of you thought of hunting people and really looking at people when you go out in the woods, and especially for public land? But when you go to private land, when Dylan, Joe, Kevin, Wes, when we're at a property, we really have to consider what's going on around the neighbors. And that's often part of that 2-hour morning conversation of not only where your food sources are, your access, you know, all that might change, but really the one hard and fast tangent that's not going to change is what's going on in the neighbors' properties, their food, their bedding, their cover. And so I like knowing what's going on around me. We've even gone to the point where if our neighbor's chain or gate was open next to us where we used to hunt in Wisconsin, then we knew that we would hunt certain stands that would take advantage of the deer that they would push off their land. Because they had 160 acres, open cover, a cabin in the middle with a pond, and they would go out from there from ATVs and they'd clear the entire parcel of all their deer. And that was the one time on Sunday or Monday, if they were there for the weekend, that we would see certain bucks on our land and they would go by certain stands. So it made a lot of sense for us, and that still applies to today. Who's hunting around me? Where are they hunting? When they hunt, where do they push deer? And it's really important to keep track of that. I'll tell you, on public land, one of the things I used to do is where I would go out, I would clear a spot that looks like a deer scrape right on the trail, like a buck scrape, and then I could see when people went through there how many tracks there were, what size footprints they were. And I can tell you, UP of Michigan, it was back all the way in 98, one of the places I was hunting. I would do that, and I saw a little footprint there, and it was like literally a size 6 or 7 shoe. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. It's a really, really short hunter out there. And then about a mile in one of my sacred spots around these ponds, I found a big boot track, 12, 13 size, and then that little one. So then you start thinking, okay, is it a husband and wife? Is it a husband and a kid? You know, what's going on? And they must be a pretty big dude. And it's interesting. One of the times I came back from hunting, a very remote area, 7 miles back. It was 2 miles back in the seasonal road, just 2 tracks, literally dead-ended at a beaver dam, and had seen no one back there. And I come back after dark. When I come back into the car in a situation like that, I leave my flashlight off. I walk in dark, so if anyone's there, I'm more worried about people than animals, let's just put it that way. I get back, there's a note on my truck. Hadn't seen anybody out there for weeks, if not months. So I remember like a little chill going down my spine, kind of like, oh my gosh, someone was back here. Are they still here? Read the note. Hey, I've been hunting back in this area for a long time. Can you call me? And I'd really want to make sure you're not sitting in my blinds or stands. And he had old blind out on public land. And my take is, yeah, I have a legal right to be there, but I want to find people stuff because I want to avoid them. I don't want to say, oh, I have every right to be here. I scouted this spot and I'm going to be here. And then you set up a confrontation. Well, most importantly, you set yourself up for failure. You know that they're going to be walking in on you during opening day, whether you beat them or they beat you. It's ridiculous, you know, so I just want to go somewhere else. So I kind of like people sign when it comes to that. It's interesting. I called that person and we had a good conversation. And I said, you must be a pretty big guy. And he said, where did you see my track? And I said, all the way back by the ponds. And I said, you must be with your wife or boy or kid or son, daughter. And he said, no, that was my wife with me. And he said, I told her not to step in that sandy area on the other side of the beaver dam. And it was my way of just knowing who was out there, approximately who was out there. Obviously, boot size, you can approximate the size of the person. He was like a 6'2", 6'3" guy, shorter girlfriend or wife. So you can tell a lot about a person. You can find where they're at in the woods. You can identify that track. We had a track that went into our property in the UP of Michigan, and they were walking right through the middle of our property. And there was a little blood here and there, so in a deer track. So we assumed they'd shot something, wounded something. It wasn't that wounded. We wanted to find out who it was. We had no trespassing signs. They walked 250 yards into the property. So my brother and I drove around, and we literally had to drive about 8 miles. We checked all the turnoffs for that boot track. Each turnoff, all the way around in 8 miles, and about 2.5 miles in on a seasonal road, we found a vehicle with that boot track getting out of it and walking into the woods. So we knew they were still in their blind. We followed the boot track, and we came right to a carpet laying on the end of a point in some conifers. And the tracks ended. Lifted up the carpet, and there was a guy's head. He was literally sitting in a pit blind that he had put logs and trees over, put soil over it, and he'd been sitting there so long. In fact, this would have been in 99, 2000. And in 2006, it was his 30th anniversary, sitting in the same blind in the same spot. He was just a startle. Imagine picking a piece of carpet up and there's a guy's head there. And he looked up at us. He was just as shocked as we were. We talked to him, had a great conversation. He'd been hunting there for a long time. He's someone from town. And I like getting to know my neighbors, even if they're on public land. And that's why I really like hunting people in a lot of different ways. And when it comes to public land, we'll talk about developing heat maps here in a second and how it can really translate to your success. For me, it's important to know how many people are in the area, where they're hunting, if they're hunting by you or not. I don't want to set myself up for a conflict or a confrontation, but mostly I don't want them ruining my hunt. So I want to go find a spot where no one's hunting. So I like when people leave sign. Public land, roads, parking areas, trails, ribbons going in, tacks, slash marks on trees, trails, ATV marks back 2 miles in marsh on public land. I've seen it all. I like looking for all those people points and then staying away from them. And depending how big the people point, if it's a parking area and there's 4 or 5 cars there, I want to be a mile and a half, 2 miles away from there, because I know that there's going to be hunters saturated over a certain area as opposed to just one vehicle. They're in one spot. And then in the off season, I want to find out where they're at. Private, we're looking for food sources, water sources, change of habitat, cover, potential bedding areas, and certainly access routes from your neighbors. You want to consider that. When you put it all together, you can develop a heat map. And what I mean by that is you take out all the road areas, you take out all the trail areas, take out all the walking areas, and all of a sudden you have 10,000 acres of public land, 5,000 acres, and you boil it down to 1% of that, 10% of that, where you can actually go scout. 5% of that. So you can take 10,000 acres, narrow it down to 100 acres. Because you're taking out all those areas. Now you develop heat maps of core areas. You develop core areas. Now if you're an advanced hunter and you want to really get into the woods deep, now you've given yourself some real core areas where you can go explore. Maybe it takes an hour in, you have to cross a couple beaver dams. But you know the potential of other hunters being there are very low. And then you can develop areas that are closer to cars or closer to parking areas where at least it's in between smaller parking areas. It's away from campgrounds, away from roads. And you might say, you know, I only have to go in 200-300 yards, 400 yards, but the potential of people not being there is very high. I'll give you an example of a high potential people area, Michigan. And I'm sure they do this in other states, but they had food plots on public land areas. Well, a public land food plot next to a road sounds good. Sounds all, you know, kumbaya, we're going to help the local wildlife, we're going to put a bunch. What it is a giant bait pile for hunters. Hunters flock around these food sources because they'll drive by during the summer. You put trail cameras around there, probably multiple trail cameras. People see the deer coming in before the season begins, and man, they're just flocked in there. So that's an area I want to know about, so I avoid it, like a lot of these others. So you're not really hunting people, obviously. You're hunting the signs that people leave, and you're developing heat map areas. And you know the further you get away from food, so if you can identify food, maybe big clear cuts on public land, and you develop those core areas away from people, now you have potential morning stands where you wait for deer to come back to you. And then you have transition areas between that big food source and bedding, no different than a food plot on your neighbors, and you have some cover. You can develop afternoon stands closer to the food source, whether it's a neighbor's ag field, whatever it might be, or your own. And then you develop those morning core areas more closer to bedding, and then those stands in between, or lack of. And what I mean by that is you start looking at it, you say, between the roads, the parking areas, the trails, the campsites, the food sources, hunter access in general, boat landings, where we're going out in Pennsylvania a little bit, a week and a half from now for the gun season opener, you can say, there's nowhere left for deer, or at least mature bucks. Because on public land, you want to at least have half mile, 3/4 mile of a buffer from major food sources and everything else that's people area. On private land, that might be 100 to 300 yards, because deer are used to a smaller amount of space to work with. So you can develop these heat map areas and where to hunt, and certainly where not to hunt. I hope that makes sense. It's no different. You can take all this. You're looking for people sign, where they hunt. So you know what I do? I make sure when I'm on public land, say in the UP of Michigan, where I park my car in a remote spot and I go in, I don't even want other hunters to know which way I'm going. I make sure I don't crush ferns down. I don't use tacks. I don't use ribbons. I don't use trails. In fact, I might pass the same tree on the way in and way out of a 40-minute swamp walk into a funnel that I want to hunt. Might pass by, I remember that walking by that tree in the dark. Or you walk in the morning and you walk out at night and you end up walking by the same tree because I'm following a compass route. Now we have great mapping services. We use HuntWise, and we have all the GPS capability. What happens if you're playing with your phone all day and you don't bring a backup battery or a charging pack and you lose your phone? I always, in these deep remote areas, have a compass hanging around my neck. So learn how to use a compass. Learn how not to leave the sign that you're looking for, because 99% of other hunters are going to notice that. It was pretty odd that person, he ended up being in the UP of Michigan. He was kind of an outlaw. He'd been in jail for breaking in a bunch of homes and different kind of family. Ended up staying on his good side, which was a good thing. But it was pretty odd that was the type of person looking out for leaving tracks. He specifically walked around that sand trap that I'd made on the other side of that beaver dam, wondering, looked odd to him. And he told his wife, don't step in that, and she did. He said, I told her not to step in that. Be that kind of person. And if you approach your hunting like that you're looking out for other people, you're trying to find out where they're at, you're looking for those really good heat map areas where you can find, then you're going to be a better hunter. Not only planning your hunt on private land for where you put your food sources, making sure you have that depth of cover where you have enough bedding area left over, 100 to 300 yards of unbroken cover where a mature buck can go back and do, or the oldest buck in the neighborhood, whatever that is. And then certainly on public land, looking for those hunter hotspots and avoiding them, then you're going to find really good hunting success going forward, not only this season, private, public land, but for years to come. I appreciate you guys watching the YouTube channel, but I don't know if everyone knows everything that we have to offer, whether it's on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, our website, our WHS Wildlife Blends, our seed company. Also Instagram you can check out. I'm very active on Instagram, putting strategies on there, photos of what we do every day. Much more active there than Facebook. But our seed, web classes, books, clients, articles. I have over 600 articles on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, everything whitetail strategy. Of course, we have hats on there, and then make sure to check us out on Instagram again. But lots of stuff to offer. We're always coming out with new things, and this isn't the end of it. We have more things coming soon. Make sure to check us out.